Rewriting the Reality, Understanding Conscious Experience. Hi, I am Tomas Guevara, and this is the channel Rewriting the Reality. Last year I got an email from the Science Alert magazine, published on July 31, 2023, by David Neild. The title is, "We May Have Found the Part of the Brain Where Conscious Experience Lives." Before I proceed to transcribing this email, please subscribe to this channel. You will learn a lot about your brain. In today's episode number 176, I am going to number the ideas these people have to confirm or debunk them. The email said the following: new research sheds light on a tricky idea of consciousness. There's a difference between what the brain takes in and what we are consciously aware of taking in. Scientists now think they've pinpointed the brain region where that conscious awareness is managed. The team, from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel and the University of California, Berkeley, in the US, found sustained brain activity in the occipitotemporal area of the visual cortex in the back of the brain. While this activity dropped to around 10 to 20% of its level about 300 milliseconds after an original visual stimulus, the pattern of activity remained while the stimulus was viewed. That was in contrast to other brain areas, where information disappeared entirely within half a second, 500 milliseconds. This stable representation suggests a neural basis for stable perception over time, despite the changing level of activity, says psychologist Leon Diowel from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In other words, this neural region is where we not just notice something but also notice that we're noticing it. As the visual stimulus changed, a series of images, so did the brain activity recorded by the researchers. Machine learning algorithms then filtered out the noise and spot patterns. Researchers enlisted 10 epilepsy patients for the study who were already scheduled to have electrodes fitted inside their skulls. These electrodes allow for a more complete measure of brain activity over time, with less guesswork, compared with other brain scanning methods that work externally. We are adding a piece to the puzzle of consciousness, how things remain in your mind's eye for you to act on, says psychologist Robert Knight from UC Berkeley. The researchers can't say for sure how their findings relate to consciousness, but they suggest that the sustained activity in the visual cortex could be fed back to the prefrontal cortex, where thoughts and actions are managed. There remains a lot of scientific debate about how this all does or doesn't work. After damage to one brain hemisphere following a stroke, for example, some people experience unilateral neglect. They only consciously perceive half a photo or scene but emotionally react to it in its entirety. Ultimately, further research and data gathering, which leads to a better understanding of consciousness, could help restore the brain when conditions such as unilateral neglect take hold. What is required for something not only to be sensed by the brain but for you to have a subjective experience? Says Diowel. Understanding that would eventually help us understand what is missing in the cognitive system and in the brains of patients who have this kind of a syndrome. This research has been published in Cell Reports. Now here is my analysis of this report. They said, there's a difference between what the brain takes in and what we're consciously aware of taking in. In my opinion, to build something robust you must have strong bases. The problem is that they are analyzing the brain, not what consciousness is. It is like analyzing the box breaker of your house and not analyzing the energy that passes through it. First, we are not the brain, therefore we are always conscious of everything. This can easily be demonstrated under hypnosis. Just put an individual under a deep trance, then ask him or her to detail anything that happens since he or she left the house to go to the workplace. The individual can relate second by second what happened around in his or her way to the workplace. The research mentioned that, after damage to one brain hemisphere following a stroke, for example, some people experience unilateral neglect. They only consciously perceive half a photo or scene but emotionally react to it in its entirety. Let me explain how this happens. First, our senses, in this case, our eyes, send signals to the brain of half of the photo. The photo is made of links of consciousness. The subjective self can see these links of consciousness and reconfigure the photo entirely and send this information to the brain. Therefore, the brain gets 100% of the information and reacts 100% emotionally to it. According to the science community, consciousness is what allows you to think, remember, and feel things, and this is incorrect. We are consciousness, but consciousness, with a capital C, is more than us. Therefore, to differentiate us from consciousness, with a capital C, that is everything, I labeled ourselves essences. To experience something, we create this something first, using our perceptions mechanism. Once we experience this something, this will be recorded, not in our brain, but in our body consciousness. Of course, when you see what you have created, the neurons of your brain will immediately turn on and off because you are using your beliefs to analyze what you created. Then, if you are remembering this something, the neurons of your brain will turn on and off because the brain is analyzing again this something that you are remembering. And of course, you can come to another conclusion of what you originally saw and what you are remembering now. Also, you can take some actions based on what your brain is analyzing, or reanalyzing, and this is your objective self doing it, following the analysis of the brain, or we can put it better by saying, following the recommendations of the brain. But in some cases, your subjective self can make the decision, and we call it following the intuition. This information I have just given you will answer the points that I marked as 2 and 3. And this has to do with the importance that we give to what we are experiencing. The stable representation mentioned in point 4 is also related to the importance we give to what we saw or felt, but this will never be forgotten, because it is recorded within our consciousness, not only in the body consciousness that is completely different. This will explain the situation I marked in point 5. Regarding consciousness, they think that the hardest phenomenon to explain is its fundamental feature, that is its subjectivity. In reality, it is not hard at all if you equate subjectivity with free will. That is why we divide ourselves into two, objective and subjective consciousness. Let me give you an example. You can walk around any place naked, that is your free will. But there are some objective guidelines that tell us that this is against the law, and therefore you will think twice about walking naked in Central Avenue, that is your objective consciousness. We created the laws based on our beliefs, because what damage will you cause walking naked in Central Avenue? Probably you will only cause damage to yourself, being punched by some irritated individual, or thrown in prison by the police. Point 6 mentioned that they enlisted 10 epilepsy patients for the study. To these patients, they are going to connect electrodes for a more complete measure of brain activity, but measuring the brain activity is not the same as measuring consciousness. In episode 26, I explained the cause of epilepsy. Remember that our senses are always sending signals to our brain. The consciousness of the body sends signals to the brain too, like I need rest, nutrition, sleep, deep desires, etc. Now when the signals contradict your beliefs, they cause a short circuit in your brain, epilepsy. Usually, 1 week after death, the body consciousness ceases to exist and becomes something else. Of course, that includes the consciousness of your brain and your whole body. But your consciousness, which is your mind or your soul, continues exploring other realities. You left a copy of what we could call your worldview in the regional area 2 of the universal consciousness for others to access. You can also leave a deposit of energy in some area of your neighborhood or at your home, and anyone can interact with this deposit of energy, and because of its energy, anyone can reconfigure it. Usually, this is what we call ghosts. Before publishing anything, I contact the people involved. In this case, I contacted Mr. Leon DL, and he denied the information published as follows: "Thanks for sharing. I have a very different perspective about the mind and the brain from yours, as you might imagine. I just want to clarify that the statement in your friend's email that we might have found where consciousness lives is not something that we claimed or believe. Also, the statement in point 5 that this neural region is where we not just notice something but also notice that we're noticing it is also mistaken. Noticing that we are noticing is self-awareness, or metacognition, which is not something we studied. Where can one listen to your podcast? Sincerely, Leon YEDL, MD, PhD." Jack H. Skirball Professor in Brain Research, Department of Psychology, Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Brain Sciences, ELSC, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and remember that you can buy my books at Amazon.com.